Mr. President and Vice-Chancellor, as public orator, may I present Mr. Tony James Heaton as a candidate for an honorary degree. Tony Heaton was born in Preston, Lancashire. He was involved in a motorcycle accident when he was 16, which left him with a spinal injury. At this time, he transferred from a local comprehensive school to an art college in Southport. After leaving college, he became a self-employed artist, a signwriter, a mural painter, and in addition to these artistic pursuits, he had interest in music as a member of a progressive rock band, disc jockey, and record shop proprietor. It was later observed that Tony had gained an enormous amount of expertise while appearing to be aimlessly drifting through life. Later, he studied art at Lancaster University. In a defining moment, Tony took part in an environmental sculpture exercise on the sands of Morecambe Bay. It was noticed that Tony's foot and crutch prints were immediately identifiable in the sand. This was an idea which Tony first used in his first piece of disability art, a plaster cast of his own feet and stick imprints. Tony's artistic concept is driven by a careful consideration of disability and the attitude of others to disabled people. In the Middle Ages, disabled people were thought to be possessed by demons. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the human body was viewed as something to be scientifically studied, and its functions were classified. It was from this period that the medical definition of disability became fashionable. In 1830, the Belgian statistician Adolphe Quetelet defined the concept of the average man in terms of weight, height, and general activity. This was the norm to which all people should aspire. Statistics were collected in Europe and America to extend this idea into the area of eugenics. It was thought that the gene pool of the population had to be protected from any abnormalities. It may seem obvious that these concepts are now outmoded, but they still had an influence on the way disabled people were treated by the medical model. Disability was viewed as a problem of the person, directly caused by disease, trauma, or health conditions that required sustained medical care. In the early 1970s, disability campaigners began to challenge how society treated disabled people based on the medical model. The concept of the social model of disability was coined by Professor Mike Oliver in 1983. To take an example, in the 1980s, it was difficult for a disabled person to enter this building, the De Montfort Hall, and most other buildings in the country. The social model asserts that it is society that disables people by constructing inaccessible buildings. The lives of disabled people can be transformed by providing suitable access to all buildings. The inclusion of disabled people is an essential part of a cohesive society. Any one of us can be made disabled in any split second by a random accident. Tony's early sculptures used the paraphernalia of disability, collection cans, wheelchairs, and even disability access building regulations. These items were turned into what one critic described as profound and joyous, witty statements of what it means to be disabled. One early piece called Springback used spinal x-rays and shock absorber springs from a scrap motorcycle. This is a reminder of the accident which caused Tony's injury and also the metal strengthening spring implanted in his spine. In 1995, Tony made a wood carving out of a piece of ash, described by a woodturner as useless because it had a fault running through it. Tony called his piece Split, as it represented to him the way society values only the perfect and discards everything that is damaged or imperfect. One of Tony's best-known pieces is Britain from a Wheelchair, constructed from 2 wheelchairs and chosen by the National Disability Arts Collection as an example of the golden age of disability art. The piece was redesigned as 2 lecterns used by Lord Coe and Sir Philip Craven during the opening ceremony of the Paralympics in 2012. Tony has good connections with the Attenborough Arts Centre at the University of Leicester. He is on the board of the centre, and his sculpture Gold Lame was a centrepiece of the opening exhibition of the new gallery at Attenborough Arts. The piece shows a blue invalid car designed for a person who is lame. But here the car is painted gold, in fact, gold lame. Tony's point is made clear with wit and humour. He says the piece mirrors his own adjustments from biker to invalid. From 1997 to 2008, Tony was director of the Holton Lee Trust in Dorset, which offers residential accommodation for disabled people to pursue artistic and spiritual activities. He developed a 10-year strategic plan for the Trust with several new buildings, including a very beautiful Faith House gallery. In 2009, Tony became Chief Executive of Shape Arts. He brought to this general arts charity a perspective on disability arts. One of his first innovations was to introduce Shape Open, an exhibition of new work on the theme of disability by disabled and non-disabled artists. Tony initiated a bursary to enable disabled artists to spend time at leading visual arts institutions. The scheme is named after Tony's fellow sculptor, Adam Reynolds. Tony Heaton has had an impact on the way all of us perceive disability. He was awarded the Order of the British Empire in 2013. President and Vice-Chancellor, on the recommendation of the Senate and Council, I present Anthony James Heaton so that you may confer upon him the degree of Doctor of Letters.
Too much tonic, not enough gin. But they're nevertheless very welcome on a warm afternoon. Vice-Chancellor, Fellows of this University, and everyone gathered here today, well, thank you very much. This is a tremendous honour for me, and I'm very pleased to accept it. And I'm very pleased to be here as well. I was relaxing this morning. I hope you were relaxing too. I don't know, were you? Yeah. As I was relaxing, I thought, do you know, it's really just occurred to me, but this may be the very last lecture you've got to attend. And I'll keep it succinct, and you don't have to take any notes. Now, I know it sounds like a cliche, but coming to university was a life changer for me. They say you've got 7 seconds to make an impression, and most people's first impression of me is as a disabled person. It's difficult to hide a wheelchair. Not that I would ever want to do that. I've got a pride in being a disabled person, and I'm part of a wider disability culture and a disability arts movement, and I've gained strength from being part of that movement. It's political, and if you too are from a discriminated against group, you may understand what might seem to be a bit of a strange statement for me to have just made about pride. Most disabled people I know have got great and admirable qualities: tenacity, fortitude, good humour, and they need to have, because every day they will have had to battle against a world that has been constructed largely to exclude or marginalise them. This is simply illustrated by the lack of physical access to buildings, segregated entrances, inaccessible public transport systems, or the prejudice they might face from people who will actively discriminate against them. And truthfully, they will face disadvantage in virtually all areas of their lives. It was interesting that Graham spoke about the 50 years since, I think it was said man's great step, one great step for mankind. And I just thought, 50 years later, and we still haven't managed to get a wheelchair user to independently to be able to get on a bus or a train, so-called public transport. So, public transport, I don't think so, actually. And Paul spoke in his introduction of the social model of disability, and put quite simply, the social model maintains we're disabled not necessarily because of our impairments, but we're disabled by the way society's been constructed and by people who have failed to think more creatively about how to construct an inclusive and barrier-free world for a society in which we can all live. And that's where you come in. Because when I was your age, the notion of equal opportunities, inclusion and diversity were in the ascendancy. We were concerned with making a fairer world for all. I think sadly in the last 10 to 15 years, those ambitions have been pushed back and hidden behind a smokescreen of austerity. But you can change that. When you leave here and make your mark on the wider world, should you have the will to take on the challenge of restoring the balance in favour of an accessible, inclusive and equitable society. And I hope you do. In fact, I want you to. Looking back, I doubt that I would be here now in front of you if I hadn't become disabled. In fact, I became disabled when I was a few years younger than you, and I actually doubt that I would have ever gone to university if I hadn't become a disabled person. But we don't always know what our destiny is. And it's as a disabled person with lived experience, but a wider knowledge gained from campaigning for access and rights that has brought me into contact with this excellent university. So congratulations to all of you for making the choice to come to such an enlightened and diverse place of learning, with an impressive and growing reputation both nationally and internationally. My association with the university goes back many years, and as Paul said, in the early development and planning of the Attenborough Arts Centre, which from its early beginnings is now a flourishing arts centre with an exciting programme of cultural events, and it's been a real honour to have accompanied them on that journey. I've also been incredibly lucky to work with the RCMG over many years, the Research Centre for Museums and Galleries here at the university. It has a worldwide reputation for innovation, progressive thinking, and positive action in making museums and galleries relevant to the way we live now, and actually in defining heritage in a contemporary and meaningful way. I'm indebted to both Professor Richard Sandel and Professor Jocelyn Dodd, who are world leaders in their field, and who've welcomed me into their world and allowed me to share in a small way some of my insights and experience. I guarantee you, when you go into a museum or gallery in the future, and you come away amazed at how inclusive, ethical and dynamic it is, it will be because the RCMG has infiltrated it, left it changed for the better and richer for the community that it serves. It's been my absolute pleasure to work with them, learn so much, and to see their work having such an impact across the world. And I know you will also go out and carry on with the mission from RCMG, those graduates from that particular department. Now, the last thing I want to say to you is that I hope you've all enjoyed your time here. And for me, it took a while for my learning to sink in. I studied social administration, psychology and visual arts, and I majored in sculpture, and that's what I do now. But it was only after I graduated that I realized I hadn't been taught about those 3 subjects. What I'd really learned was how to start thinking, questioning, researching, and how to practically apply critical thinking, not just to these 3 subjects, but to everything I would do throughout my life then and now. And whilst you may go out there and hone your skills and gather your experience, I would also urge you to remember humility, love, and kindness. And these are the things that perhaps you'd learn from inside of yourselves. Attending university was a great decision, and perhaps like some of you now, I had no idea back then what I would do and where life might take me. In fact, it was only some time later, when I was no longer caught up in the sort of maelstrom of it all, and I had time for reflection, that I started to realize what a great privilege I'd experienced by going to university. So thank you for this award, which I'm very proud to receive. Congratulations to all of you on your achievements to date. Good luck on your subsequent journeys, wherever they may take you. Thank you.